Hi everyone and welcome to lesson 4 of theme 2 GCSE Geography. What we're going to be looking at today is service provision in rural areas, and we're going to focus on the Gower Peninsula as a case study. So first of all, what do we mean by service provision? Provision is what is on offer, what is provided for you, and a service is anywhere or anything that is done for you. So public transport, for example, you're being driven around by a bus driver, train driver, so bus service would be an example of a service. The local pub, the local cafe, the local post office, hairdressers, anywhere where something is being done for you. Okay, so service provision in rural areas, basically what we're talking about today is what is on offer to people living in the countryside and what is happening to those things that are on offer over time. And how do those changes affect the people that live in the countryside? So we're going to create a sketch map of the Gower Peninsula first off. Do you actually know what a peninsula is, before I go any further? It's an area of land surrounded by water on 3 sides. Okay, we're then going to identify the reasons behind the decline in services in the Gower. So service provision in the Gower is going downhill. Why is that happening? And then if services are declining, what impact is that having on the different groups of people that live in the Gower? So go ahead and pause the video here a moment and write down today's title, please, and we'll get going. Okay, so first of all, we're going to draw a sketch map. Now, you're quite lucky. The old specification, you had to be able to redraw sketch maps from memory. Now, you won't have to draw a map from memory, but you may well have to draw diagrams in an exam. So sketch map and diagrammatic drawing is a skill that we need to continue to practice. So, first of all, what do we mean by provision and services? So if you're unsure, pause the video here and write these down. It's basically what I just discussed with the title. Provision is what is available or provided, and services is where something is done for you or provided for you. And there's some examples of services there. So write those down if you think you're unsure. Okay, so sketch mapping. So here's a detailed map of the Gower Peninsula. So as you can see, water, 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 which categorises this piece of land as a peninsula. The M4 motorway would be running up here, so Ponte de Lice would be up here. So there's Swansea city centre. Now, some cities are within Swansea's some villages and towns are within Swansea's commuter belt. Okay, within about a 40-minute, an hour maximum drive from Swansea. Okay, you could sort of get away with it here. Villages down this way though, Llangennith, Rhossili, Oxwich, Horton, far more isolated. You're talking a good hour and a half or so from Swansea city centre, well, certainly an hour plus, especially with the lanes that you've got to navigate to get there. So you're quite isolated, you're quite far out. What I'd like you to do is draw a rectangle in your book underneath where you just put the title, and we're going to make a sketch map of the Gower Peninsula. Now, a sketch map is you only pick out the parts that you are focusing on. So in this case, we need Swansea city centre as a reference. Llanmaddock, Llangennith, Rhossili, Oxwich and Horton are the ones that we're going to focus on. So you want the outline of the land, you want to label those places, and if I was you, I'd put Swansea Bay on as well. And what you end up with is a map that is focusing just on the things we want to look at, like this. So, pause the video here a moment, go ahead and make the sketch map into your books, please. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some data, 3 sets of data for these rural villages. We're going to look at the age of the population, the size of the population, and their shopping habits. So first off, this set of data. So put a subheading, what is happening to the population in these rural villages? Here is a set of data, and it shows you how the number of people in each of these villages has changed from 1971 to 1981. Ignore the second home and holiday home data. We're not using that in this instance. If there's a plus sign before it, the number of people living in that village has gone up. If there's a minus sign before it, obviously the number of people in that village has gone down. What is the limitation of this data? Now, a limitation means there's something wrong with it that means it might not be truthful, or it might not be reliable, or it might not be accurate. It's quite common that they like to ask you this in the exam now. They'll give you a map or they'll give you a table of data like this and they'll ask you for a limitation. Why might this data not be accurate, reliable, or truthful? Yeah, it's to do with the date. We're in 2020. This date is already 30 years out of date. So that's always a really easy one to look for, is the date of the source. Is it current? Is it reliable and up to date? But for the purpose of what we're going to discuss, this is the closest data that I could find. So in particular, if you focus on the villages down here, Llanmaddock, Oxwich, Llangenneth, Rosili, what's happening to the population? The number of people living there is dropping. Okay? So I'd like you to write the sentence. The data shows that the most rural villages of Gower are experiencing depopulation. That means people are leaving. The population is declining. For example, so you should always quote data if you're talking about data. For example, Rosili has seen a 14.6% drop in population, and Oxwich has seen a 6% drop in population. Don't talk about every single village, just 2 or 3 of them is fine to quote the figure for. So the data shows that the most rural villages of Gower are experiencing depopulation. For example, Rosili has lost 14.6% of its population between 1971 and 1981, and Oxwich has lost 6% of its population. So the number of people living here is going down. We call it depopulation. What about the age demographic? The age of the people that are living here. So again, the limitation of this data is a little bit out of date. 1971 to 1991. We're in 2020 now. So it's obviously out of date, could make it unreliable, but for the purpose of what I want to discuss, this is fine. If you sort of group the ages a little bit, so 0 to 4 and 5 to 9 are staying fairly steady. What's happening when you kind of get to your late teens and early 20s? What's happening to the number of people in that age category? Versus what's happening when you look at people that are 70 plus? What do you notice? Yeah. The younger age categories are leaving. Their numbers are going down. The older age categories are increasing. Their numbers are going up. We call this an aging population. So the data shows that people between age 10 to 24 are leaving the area. The population of that age group is declining. Whereas 70 years and older, that section of the population is increasing. So you've got elderly people moving in, young people moving out. This causes an aging population. Pause the video here and write down a couple of sentences about what's happening to the age of the population in the Gower. Okay, so there's fewer people there, and the people that are there are older. Finally, shopping habits. Now, on non-store retailing, what do you think that might be? That large kind of medium green segment there that accounts for nearly half of all the shopping going on. What do you think non-store retailing is? Yeah, it's another way of saying online shopping. And then you've got food stores, department stores, clothing, household and other. So online shopping these days accounts for almost half of all the shopping that is happening. Fewer and fewer people are going into store to do their shopping. So the data shows that the way we are shopping has changed. We are shopping more and more online, with nearly half of retail happening in non-store retailing. So 3 things are happening in the most rural villages on the Gower Peninsula. You've got depopulation, an ageing population, and everyone's starting to shop online instead. So this just summarises what we've learned from the data. You don't need to write it down if you don't want to. Okay, the number of people living in these more isolated rural villages is declining. We call that depopulation. And the younger people are mostly the ones that are leaving, creating an ageing population. It's mostly the old people that are moving in or the old people that are left behind. There's also a shift towards online shopping rather than going into store. What this creates is changing demand for things in the countryside. Whoop, my bad. Okay, so how would less people more old people and more online shopping affect services in the rural area. So for example, a service in the Gower Peninsula would be the little post office with the supermarket attached in Rossilly. How might the post office be affected? And how might the supermarket be affected? It's a little bit of a sort of double-edged sword here. If people are doing more shopping online and ordering their food online, then the supermarket sector might find they have less customers, so that might shut down. But if everyone's doing their shopping online, there's going to be more deliveries coming into the area. And if you miss your deliveries, they go to the post office. So the post office might become a bit busier. Also, an ageing population, when you go to get your pension, quite often you go to the post office to draw out your pension, to get your pension each week. So Rossilly Post Office and Supermarket, the supermarket may shut down because more people are doing their food shopping online, but the post office may become busier because there's more elderly people going in to get their pension and there's more deliveries coming into the area because more people are shopping online. The King Arthur pub, though, country pubs, their main income tends to be, it's shifted a little bit now towards food as well as just drink. So the King Arthur, you go there for Sunday lunch as a young family, you'd go there maybe for a few drinks after work on a Friday, you go there for drinks on Saturday evenings, they often have live bands there. Who goes to watch a live band on a Saturday evening in the local pub? Who goes to Sunday lunch in the middle of the day on a Sunday? Young families and young couples. But that's the age group that are leaving the area. It's mostly the elderly that are left. So the King Arthur pub may find that as the young people leave, they have less customers, which means they lose money and they end up closing down. The bus service. Who uses the buses? Teenagers that can't drive yet, they're leaving the area, and the elderly that aren't safe to drive anymore. When you reach 60 years plus, you get a free bus pass. You don't have to pay to ride the bus. So there's plenty of old people in the rural area with the ageing population to ride the bus, but they don't have to pay for it. And the teenagers that would pay to ride the bus aren't living there anymore. This means there's less demand for the bus service. The bus service won't be making as much money, so they run fewer and fewer buses until there's maybe 1-2 buses a day if you're lucky. And Llanganeth Primary School, in a lot of rural areas, each village has its own little primary school. You might see on the news sometimes that there might only be 12 children going to some of these countryside primary schools. That's very, very expensive to run. And as more and more young families are moving out of the countryside, it means that less and less children are going to these schools, and therefore the schools aren't going to be able to run anymore. Those local primary schools are going to shut, and that's going to leave a lot of teachers without jobs. So pause the video here, re-listen to what I've just said if you need to write just a sentence or two about what would happen to the post office and supermarket, the pub, the bus service, and the primary school. Now, I need to just clarify here a minute, because at this stage, some of you normally, if you're in class, are a little bit confused. We've been saying, when we looked at counter-urbanisation, that everyone wants to move to the countryside. And the kind of people that are moving to the countryside are your young couples that want to start a family, leaving the CBD, push out of Cardiff, pull into Llantwit Major. And yes, that is true, so long as it is within the city's commuter belt. What we're talking about here is very rural villages that are quite isolated, way outside the commuter belt of the nearest large city. So there's not much to do for young people. It feels quite isolated. There's not much going on there for young families. So within the commuter belt, countryside villages, yes, people are moving in. But outside that commuter belt, like far down into the Gower, like we're looking at here with Rossilly or Oxwich or Llanganeth, you're way outside the commuter belt, you're quite isolated, so the young people don't want to be there anymore. So just to clarify that, because that normally comes up as a point when you're in class with me right now. So sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, pause the video here a minute, go back and finish a couple of sentences for each of those, please. Okay, the final thing to consider is how the change in services would affect different groups of people. So in summary, what's happening to the services is because of depopulation and because of an ageing population and because of the rise in online shopping, services are shutting down. The pubs are shutting, the buses aren't running as often, local primary schools are closing, little shops and businesses are closing because everyone's shopping online. So services are declining. The service provision, it's not there. There's not as much provided anymore. So, if you were a teenager, how is this going to affect you? Imagine you were living way down in Rossilly all by yourself and the buses aren't running. You're going to feel very isolated because you can't get into town to see your friends. In really quite rural areas as well, mobile phone signal and internet signal isn't going to be very good. So that's going to leave you feeling quite isolated as well. If you're an old age pensioner, the post office probably will stay open because there's lots of pensioners going to collect your pensions and there's lots of deliveries, so the post office probably will stay open, which means that you still have somebody to talk to, go and chat to the lady in the post office each day. That improves your quality of life. Because quite often elderly people are quite lonely in their homes, so something like this staying open in the community is a good thing. However, if the bus service stops running, you can't get to see friends and family and you can't get into town to do a little bit of shopping, you're going to start to feel quite isolated, similar to the teenager. The owner of a countryside pub and their regular customers, if most of the youngsters are moving out and that pub closes, the owner will have no way of earning money, so their standard of living will decline. The regular customers, the young regular families are moving out, so it's just a few elderly farmers that probably, or farming generations that have been living there longer, that probably still go here. So it's not enough to support the pub and keep it open. So when that shuts, that community meeting place is lost. It's where a lot of the local people would go to meet and have a chat and catch up, and it's one of the pillars of the community. So if that closes, the community feel might break down. So the owner's out of a job, not going to earn money, standard of living goes down, and the remaining local customers have nowhere to meet. So the community feel might break down in the area. Finally, a mum with primary school age children, those of you that have got younger siblings of primary school age, what are your mornings like? Trying to get everyone ready, drop the younger ones off at primary school, then get you to comprehensive, organise chaos. I'm the eldest of 6 children. I remember what it was like when I was younger, absolute chaos, trying to get everyone ready and do the school run and then get to work. It's culturally quite common now that women have their own job and their own career. What time do schools open? What time have you got to be in school? 8:30, 9. What time have you also got to be in work? 8:30, 9. So if the primary school in your local village has closed, probably what's happened is the primary schools in all the other local villages have closed as well, and they've built one big primary school somewhere further away. So now you've got to drive further to get your children to school, which is going to make you late for getting to work. So you're going to be very stressed, which lowers your quality of life. And you may even end up having to work reduced hours at your job, which means you've got less money, lower standard of living as well. So pause the video here a moment, go back and listen to what I've just said and make some bullet point notes or short sentences about how the closure of the bus service, the pubs and the local schools would affect different groups of people. Okay, and that's the end of lesson 4. Very well done. We'll be moving on next lesson. So as usual, if you have any questions, gleasona@hopecymru.net. Just drop me a message and I'll get right back to you.